The North Atlantic Treaty Organization just held a two-day heads of state and government summit in Ankara, Turkey. And beyond the bizarro soundbites of Trump declaring that the ceasefire with Iran was over and that communism is an existential threat to the United States, the NATO summit paid considerable focus on reaffirming the commitment of European member states to increase military spending. Even Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, who briefly was praised by progressives, including myself. I thought it was cool that he did this, for allegedly standing up to Trump in Davos, literally conceded defeat to Trump by saying that he won the argument on military spending. So Canada, too, has fallen in line with Europe and vowed to increase its military spending to kind of appease this NATO mandate. Similarly, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was rebuked by a Danish journalist for his subservience to Trump and who continues to threaten Greenland. And Secretary General of NATO also did a victory lap because it seems that this summit was crucial for rebuilding the unity behind Ukraine as it faces increased Russian attacks. And in the backdrop of all this were massive anti-NATO protests in cities across Turkey, including Ankara, which were met with heavy repression and saw dozens, I think over 100, get arrested. So at the end of the day, it seems like, once again, the weapons companies were the big winners at this NATO summit. So to break down what this summit means for U.S.-European ties, the future of the alliance, and more, we are very excited to be joined by Peter Mertens. He is the General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Belgium and the author of The Last Days of the Old Normal and Mutiny, How Our World is Tilting. Peter, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Breakthrough Live.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations with your show. I'm watching you.
Well, we're very excited for you to be here with us. Your insights are extremely valuable, and if you haven't read it, you can check out right now thebreakthroughnews.org. We have several of Peter's pieces published there. But first off, Peter, I wanted to get your assessment. What was the biggest takeaway from this Ankara summit with the heads of state of NATO member states being present there?
Yeah, I'm seeing three things. First of all, this is ritual flattering of the king. It became a ritual. You know, 1 year ago in The Hague, you had this daddy moment of Mark Rutte, and that was on the same summit. And now again, the whole vibe in the European Union was nervous because they were nervous about Trump. He had to remain inside his tent. He had to be pleased. He had to be said that Europe is willing to spend a lot of money. So there is some ritual to flatter the king, and the Europeans even set a king of flattery, and that's Mark Rutte. That is the main job to do. And the more they flatter the European leadership, the more they reveal their own powerlessness somewhere. So that's one thing. It's crazy to watch for me, the lack of authority of the European leaders themselves. But secondly, in fact, it's not only a NATO summit, it's a big arms fair. They are very proudly, and they're announcing, I think it's more than 43 billion euro or $50 billion of weapon contracts that are closed down at the NATO summit. So it's a big weapon fair. And like you said, the weapon producers are the big winners of this game. And Canada, for example, I think they commanded the submarines in Germany, and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he said it's the biggest weapon contract in German history. And they had a history of weapon contracts. So Canada is now buying German submarines. Belgium is buying for 3 billion euro rockets for the F-35. And we are already in a recession in Belgium. So later on this day, I will be in Parliament. It's a crisis in Belgium because there is too much money spent on military already. But our Ministry of the Defense has a Visa card, is going to Ankara and is paying 3 billion a year. It's a crazy situation. And thirdly, it is a massive theft, because I heard Donald Trump saying, okay, the Europeans have to spend equal amount of money to NATO as the USA. It's completely impossible. It's completely crazy, because USA, I think they spend $900 billion a year, and now Trump announced that the US will be spending $1.5 trillion a year. And European Union was on the level of 350 billion euro a year, and will be on 550 billion euro a year. So in 29, so it's already 200 billion a year more. It's a recession in Europe, and it's not enough. So it is a massive theft, because every penny spent on these rockets, on these submarines, etc., is a penny not spent on schools, not spent on public education, not spent on hospitals, and the whole welfare system that's been fought for by the workers in Europe themselves. They're trying to steal it. So it's also, there's some kind of grand theft behind all this crazy Ankara. And why? Finally, why are they doing to please the US, please Trump, so that Trump can concentrate himself towards his real enemy, China? That's going on, and it is a crazy theater.
Yeah, it is, and certainly a crazy theater. And there was just so many golden clips that came out of this this meeting. I mean, many of them involved Donald Trump and just like the crazy rantings he was saying, sitting next to this leader or that. But one of them in particular actually involved a Danish reporter who has some words for NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. And so we're going to play that clip, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So let's go ahead and play that clip, because it's quite an interesting one.
Mark, you sit next to Donald Trump in moments where he talks about conquering Greenland, talks about lashing out at allies like Spain, starting trade wars, things that it doesn't seem like the old Mark Rutte would approve of. Does this have any effect on your self-respect when you sit next to him like that and say nothing?
You know, what I always do is acknowledge when praise is due, and I think we should praise Donald Trump for the fact that NATO is so much stronger. Of course, it has to do with the Russian threat, it has to do with the war in Ukraine, but it very much also has to do with President Trump delivering now what since Eisenhower the United States tried to achieve, equalizing spending between the US and Europe. And it makes Europe stronger. It makes Europe more relevant for the United States as a partner. So that is the transformative character of this summit, of what happened in The Hague, the implementation since The Hague, this summit as a point in time where we take stock. And I think that is extremely important. And when it comes to Greenland, I already explained. We had a meeting in Davos. And I said, I agree with you when it comes to Russia, when it comes to China, gaining access to the High North. But let's do this together. We have NATO for this. Let's work together on this. This is exactly what we are doing.
Okay, we have very...
I mean, good. Look, that's what, you know what? I will give him this. He is fantastic at a good word salad. But that's just such an amazing answer to give. But like, it's like he's trying to basically still like stroke Trump's ego. Like these people, their deference to Trump is pretty incredible. But, you know, I want to ask you, where does the US-Europe relationship stand? Given, you know, there are some recent tensions, for example, over Iran, obviously over NATO funding, though many of these countries have fallen in line and just decided to like acquiesce to Trump's demands that they put more money into their militaries and funding NATO. Some tension over Ukraine, and obviously at least a little bit of tension over Greenland. So yeah, where does that US-Europe relationship stand? And if there are any comments you'd like to make about that video, please feel free.
Yeah, first of all, what there is some real journalism. What a relief. They let a real journalist inside the NATO building. Normally there is no journal. No, okay, the most expressing thing about the video is there was a journalist and a real question that was not dictated. And so it was a democratic error somewhere in the net. That was the only moment that you could. It is like that. It's crazy the situation. And then, of course, you had the response of Mark Rutte. He didn't respond because the journalist asked the old Mark Rutte, the premier of the Netherlands. He would not agree with all this flattering of the king. And he did not respond that question because he responded equalizing the spending, amount of spending. And that is a crazy, I will repeat it. The US will spend 1.5 trillion a year on defense. If Europe wants to do that, it is bankrupted, completely bankrupted. It will be revolution in Europe because they will destroy everything. Already today, with 200 billion euro extra a year, there is revolt everywhere. There is the elections in France. They are trying to put down the LFE with very nasty tactics. There is the elections in Germany, etc. So there is a political crisis, and it's all also caused by this big theft of NATO. And I do not think that the European Union will survive if they continue to run after Donald Trump, to continue to have this Atlantic relationship inside NATO. I don't believe in NATO 3.0. It is a theft machine. It's a war machine. It's a crazy king machine where everyone is flattering the king. So I think the European states have to leave NATO and have to construct another kind of Europe in relationship with China, with the BRICS. Like Volkswagen, for example, the industrial powerhouse of the European Union, the automotive industry, they proposed now last week a layoff of 100,000 industrial jobs. So if we want to avoid that Europe is becoming some circus attraction where you can watch the history and a tourist attraction, then Europe should change course and not become an imperialistic European Union at itself, because there are also voices that are in favor of that, but change really course. I think that will be the main goal for the debate for the next century. Which way Europe will go? Continue to be Trump's puppet, having a European imperialism, or having an autonomous way of development, which is perfectly possible.
Well, yeah, and amid Europe, all of these NATO member states pledging to increase military spending, Europe is also grappling with a serious crisis. I mean, it is the U.S. was, of course, hit by the economic burden of the Iran war, but really it was Asia, it was Europe that felt Africa that felt the economic impact of the increase in oil prices. Europe was already reeling because they had to cut off all trade with, Russia, getting cheaper gas from Russia. So the impact of rising oil prices really impacted Europe. We've also seen record heat waves hitting Europe. So how are the people of Europe responding to these developments? You've written extensively about the, utter disregard of European leaders for their own people. And we've seen interesting upsurges of people against the war machine. Of course, in Belgium, there's been a series of historic general strikes, in Italy as well. So how are people across Europe responding to these converging crises?
I think, first of all, that there is a rage among the working class in Europe, and this rage is big. And I have the uttermost respect for that rage. It can go both orientations, but it is big. In Germany, the Chancellor Friedrich Merz said people will have to work till they are 70 years old. In the Netherlands, they say the same thing. And they want to let work people to the 70s, to their 70s. It's not possible. Their bodies say, no, it's not possible. And so there is an anger. And so the manifestations, like in Belgium, we had 14 months of mobilization and strikes and nationwide mobilization on the pension issue. And what we're trying to do now is link this social issue with a military issue. And so for the first time on the 14th of June, in a European framework, we organized with other organizations and parties welfare, not warfare. A bigger manifestation in Brussels. It was 12,000 people. And more important is the organizer of the school strike against military service in Germany were present. The organizers of the resistance in the German hospitals against the militarization of their hospitals, they were present. The organizers of the No King's Days in Italy, that resembled 500,000 till 1 million people, they were present. And the next week, it was in London, a congress in the big hall with 3,000 trade unionists against the war. And this link between welfare and warfare, it's it's now being there is the birthplace of this link between welfare, not warfare, and this movement is becoming an issue in Europe, and that's a very good thing. And I think they're really, like in the parliament, you can argue against austerity, okay, you can argue against NATO, okay, but when you make the link between the austerity on social issues and the militarization, they go wild, they go mad. It's really the weak point of the adversary, that if you can tell to people they want to steal your hospitals, your schools, your pension, your social security, to build up an army to fight for their class interests. And that's a language. I think there is a lot of room for this language in Europe in the coming years.
You know, Peter, your book, The Last Days of the Old Normal, such a cool title. It analyzes this world in which the world's economic centers are shifting from west to east, and where revolts or mutinies are all the more common in the centers of capitalism and imperialism. How do you square this with the moment we're currently in, as you know, Trump, despite facing upsets and many, many embarrassments, is able to resume the war with Iran at his whim and in spite of all calculations warning against it, and also in spite of the fact that so much of the public is against it?
Yeah, I think the dialectics of this time, the difficulty in the dialectics of this time is having a regime, a powerhouse in the beginning of the decline. That's a very messy phase. That's a very violent phase. That's a very crazy phase. Starting with the genocide, of course, in Gaza, the continuously war of the Israeli apartheid regime against Gaza, against Lebanon, etc. That's messy. Also, what they did with Maduro, it's completely illegal. The fact that they are messy around the international law, that doesn't count anymore. So it's a barbaric phase, not in the future, but actually. And so that we see, and I don't think we are on the end phase of this barbaric, messy phase. Even in Europe, it is possible there will be right-wing, even more right-wing governments, I have to say, because we have already very right-wing governments. But at the other way around, I think this is also the violence of a force unleashed, a force that knows that that's in the beginning of the decline. And so behind all this power, there is some kind of powerlessness of this regime. And it may sound crazy. I do think, for example, concrete example, they wanted to win the war against Iran, the illegal war against Iran, in a short amount of time. They needed, in the national security strategy, they said, okay, the Europeans have to pay to continue the war against Russia. Israel has to wage the war against Iran, etc. And so we can concentrate troops and money and material in the Asia Pacific against China. That was their goal. It's on paper. But they had to take some material from Ukraine to the Persian Gulf. They had to take some material from South Korea to the Persian Gulf, and they lost the war. Whatever Trump says, and whatever this last phase now is, they really strategically lost the control they had on West Asia, I think, for good. And so it weakens themselves on the more long term. And so this perspective that on the long term, Asia is coming up, China is coming up, the world is changing, and in the intermediate time, it's a messy thing. That's a complicated contradiction, I think. But because of the tides they are changing on the long term, because of China coming up, and because of China having a completely other politics, there is also reason for optimism, and that's why the progressive forces, I think, in Europe and also in the US, the progressive mayors, the progressive forces from beneath, the trade unions, they should advocate for relationships with China, with the BRICS country. You don't have to agree with China on all points. That's not a goal, but you can have another relation. And I really think if we won't go in that direction as Europe either, Europe will be lost in history. It will. it will be an attraction park, a Disney park for rich pensioners from everywhere. Yeah.
I mean, Peter Mertens, incredible analysis as always. And if you haven't already, you can check out Mutiny, How Our World is Tilting. It is available at 1804 Books. You can buy it online. Incredible read. I think hopefully Last Days of the Old Normal will be available in English soon, unless you read French or Dutch, and in that case, you can read it already. I also loved the book you wrote during the pandemic, They've Forgotten Us, The Working Class Care and the Looming Crisis. Peter, thank you so much for joining us here at Breakthrough News.
No, thank you.